welcome to episode 38 of Military Veterans Podcast, where we talk to veterans to learn about their stories and experiences. And today we're joined by William Toti. Hey, William.
Hey, how's it going, Gav? That was done in your best BBC voice, I might add.
Well, thanks very much. I'll do my best. We call it a broadcasting, because some people don't like the BBC. But there we go. Okay. So, enough. William, also known as Bill, it's great to have you on the show. And so, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Having a great time here in Florida.
Great. I'm glad you said where you were, because we are doing another remote recording, and you're in Florida. We do have a little bit of a delay today. Don't know why. So we're going to do our best to get through the recording and try not talking over each other. But how is it over in Florida?
Let's see. I wouldn't know what temperature it is in Celsius, but it's a wonderful 78 Fahrenheit here. Nice clear skies. And just couldn't be nicer.
Excellent. Still one part of America I've not been to. So maybe in the future I'll get down to that part. But everyone that's been says it's really cool and enjoyable. So one day. Well, like I said, Bill, it's great to have you on the show, but we're going to dive into the 4 questions that we have on every one of our episodes. So if you could summarize like a bullet point answer for each, and then we'll dive into the main part of the show. So the 4 questions are, when did you join the military? What service and branch did you join? How long did you serve for? And what rank did you get to?
I joined in 1974 as an enlisted man before I went to Annapolis. I joined the United States Navy Submarine Service. Not counting my Annapolis time, I served 26 years, just a little over 26 years on active duty, and I retired at the rank of Navy captain.
Excellent. Well, it's really exciting because I don't think I've ever, I haven't. I've not really spoken to anybody that's really been on submarines for a long period of time or anything. So I may have some silly questions as we get going, but there's other people out there like me.
Yep, that's fine. I'm happy to answer questions, silly or not.
Okay, wonderful. Well, Bill, let's dive into your show and rewind the clock. So where was you born and where did you grow up?
I was born in a steel town in Ohio called Youngstown. All 4 of my grandparents were immigrants from Italy, so they worked in the steel. My grandfathers worked in the steel mills. I joined the Navy at 17. I was first enlisted, and then went to Annapolis after about a year of enlisted time. So I got a little bit of experience as an enlisted man before I started my training to become an officer. Okay.
So let's talk about your childhood. So you mentioned, where was the town again?
The town was northeastern Ohio in a place called Youngstown. That area of the country is very famous because it's where the American National Football League was formed in that area of Ohio. So that's a small detail, but it was mostly steel mills. It was very blue collar, and that was kind of your future, your legacy. My father broke away a little bit from that by going to, after he was drafted during the Korean War, went to law school and became a lawyer. So he was the first one in my line of the family to go to college.
Okay. And just for people that aren't fully aware of all the states and their location, whereabouts is that in in the states aspect of the US?
South of the Great Lakes, south of Lake Erie to be specific, and west of Pennsylvania. So it's kind of on the border of what people would consider the Midwest, although we did not consider ourselves Midwesterners. We thought we were kind of unique in Ohio.
Okay. And how was schooling for you and that kind of stuff? Did you enjoy education?
I did. I was better at the academic part than the physical part. I played a little bit of baseball as a boy, and then tried my hand in various other sports, but the academics came easy. In fact, there was a program in the States called National Science Foundation High School Academics Program, Academic Science Program, which would have allowed me to skip year 12 of high school and go straight to college, university. And so I was accepted into that and started at Indiana University, but I was only 15 at the time and quickly determined that I was way outside of my element as a 15-year-old college student. So I actually dropped out of the program and went back and finished my senior year in high school before I joined the Navy.
Okay. And you mentioned joining the Navy. You did say 17, didn't you?
Yes, 17.
Yeah. So what enticed you? Did you have much military background from your family?
Everyone that I knew that had been in the military had actually been drafted into the Army. My father served his minimum required 2 years during the Korean War, as did my uncle. My great uncle served in World War II in Guadalcanal and the Philippines and the Pacific. And everyone would say to me, Bill, if you ever go into the military, go into the Navy because at least you'll sleep between clean sheets. Well, whether they were clean or not is another matter, right? But in truth, I never had to sleep in the mud, but not much. Trainings there a few times. But so I did follow their advice. I wanted to be an astronaut. The moon program was very active in the late 60s, early 70s. And the only way you could become an astronaut was to be a military pilot. So that was my goal. I got to meet John Glenn in 1973 when he was campaigning for the United States Senate. And he kind of influenced me to go to the Naval Academy to be what he was, a Marine pilot, so I could follow in his tracks to become an astronaut. It didn't work out that way, but my career was just fine as it was.
Nice. So yeah, some good inspiration, I suppose, to follow in people's footsteps like that. And so when you did sign on, do you call it that for the Navy when you sign on?
We do, yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Or enlist, yeah.
Or enlist. Okay, cool. So when you went there, did they give you a list of jobs you could do in the Navy? Is that where it kind of started from once you got that list?
Yeah. That's kind of the way you take an entrance exam, and based on how you do in the entrance exam, it determines what academically you're qualified to do. And I was pretty much qualified to do everything, as you might imagine. I was, because I'd taken physics in high school and chemistry and calculus in high school. And so from an academic standpoint, I was fine. From a physical standpoint, I could do anything except SEALs. I did not qualify for that. So I decided to start training to enter the submarine service as an enlisted man. But my real goal was biding my time as an enlisted man until I could get into Annapolis the next year and begin officer training.
Right. So you've mentioned that a few times. So is that the place you go to become an officer in the U.S. Navy? Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that Annapolis graduates would tell you that it's the most prestigious place you could go to become an officer in the Navy. You can go to other universities and go through what's called a Reserve Officer Training Course or ROTC program and get commissioned that way. But, Annapolis, the academy is kind of not only is it free, no tuition, but, it's generally considered to be the most prestigious, historically the most significant place from which to get an appointment as a commissioned officer in the United States Navy.
Okay. Well, we'll definitely learn more about that later when you come along that part of your career. So let's talk about once you've joined up. You head off to, I'm hoping it's called basic training as well.
It is.
Is that correct? Yeah. And just having a
Yeah,
think
it
here,
is.
just U.S. Navy. I'm like 100% confident now. You're like the first U.S. Navy person as well. So it's a big episode, in fact. So, you know.
Well, it's a great honor. Thank you.
So yeah, basic training. So where does that happen for the U.S. Navy?
In a town north of Chicago, Illinois, called Great Lakes Training Center. And it's a Navy, where all Navy basic training occurs nowadays. And so that's where I went. And it's a miserable place in the winter, as you can imagine. It's far north, a lot of snow. And all I knew when I was there, because I did go in the winter, was I want to get out of this place as soon as I can, right? Graduate from boot camp or basic training and get out to where I could, someplace warm. So that was my only objective, to survive.
And remind us what year this is.
That was 1974.
This is 74. And you said it's winter.
Mm-hmm.
So is this like the beginning or end?
Yeah, I started basic training in September, graduated in December, and then had got about 2 weeks of leave, and then began technician training in the same place, unfortunately, in Great Lakes, Illinois.
Right.
My basic training was over.
So with basic training, did you find that decent? Was there anything you excelled at in basic?
Even though I was 17, I was selected to become the recruit chief petty officer, or the head recruit in my recruit company. And it's a weird sequence of events that got me there. I'd been a Eagle Scout, Boy Scout, and that's an organization that was created in England, of course. And Lord Baden-Powell was, the creator of Boy Scouts. And so I had some leadership experience. And of course, I stood out academically before I joined boot camp. And the recruit, our drill instructor, to use the American expression, decided to take a chance on this young, skinny, 17-year-old kid and say, okay, we're going to make you the chief head recruit in this company of, I think it was 85 or so recruits. And so that was my first real leadership challenge, because everybody was older than me and everybody was bigger than me. And so it really took a lot of finesse not to be, manhandled by all of these people that I was then tasked to lead. But I survived, I'll say it that way.
That's good. And it probably taught you a few things about yourself as well, right? Having to maybe stand up to some of the older ones.
Well, for the first probably 6 or 7 years of my Navy career, even after I was commissioned, many, if not most, of the people I was tasked to lead were in fact older than me, chief petty officers, senior NCOs, things like that. And so it was good training at the age 17 for what I was going to experience for the first, I'd say, quarter of my commissioned officer Navy career.
And then you mentioned about staying in the same location to do your next part of your training. Did you say that was technical? Is that right?
Yes, it was technical school to train as a radar technician. That was my in those days, before you went to a submarine, you trained first as some kind of technician, and then you went to something called nuclear power school, where you learned how to operate and repair the nuclear reactor on the submarine. So I had in my schedule, in my pipeline, 2 years worth of school before I would arrive at my first submarine as an enlisted man. And of course, all of that was truncated when I was selected to go to Annapolis and not remain as an enlisted man. And I was selected probably in May of 1975, excuse me. And what happened then was my senior enlisted boss, who was a senior chief petty officer, somewhat equivalent to a first sergeant in the Army, said, well, I'm going to pull you out of this school since you're not going to be an enlisted man. And for the next 2-3 months until you leave for the academy, your job is going to be to clean heads, latrines, toilets. And so that was all over the base. My job was to go around from latrine to latrine and clean the toilets. I'll never forget his name. His name was Senior Chief New City, burned into my brain. His point to me was, I never want you to forget what it's like to be an enlisted man and have somebody who has complete control over your life. And so that was my lesson. My last lesson as an enlisted man was a professional toilet cleaner for 2 or 3 months.
Okay. So with that, you join up as an enlisted man, but you knew that you were going to go over to the officer side pretty much as soon as possible. Is that right?
That's what I wanted to do.
Right.
Every time I told that to one of my counselors as an enlisted man, they would just break out laughing. It was just like, there's no way this is happening. You're either really naive or really stupid to believe that you're going to be going to Annapolis with less than 1 year of time in the Navy. And again, I was very lucky, and my luck overcame my naivete or stupidity, and it happened the way I had hoped it would happen.
So how did that work then? Did you have to put like loads of forms in and or just keep talking to like the boss person?
I had to apply and compete alongside everybody else for one of the, at the time, I believe it was about 1,100 slots for acceptance into the class of 1979. But there was 10,000 applicants for those 1,100 slots. And so I was I got one of those that got an appointment, one of the lucky ones. Now, I think it didn't hurt that the Vietnam War was just winding down. And there were a lot of people that just didn't want to serve in the Navy. So I don't know that the quality of applicants then was what it is today. So the joke is that I'm not sure I would have gotten accepted if I'd been competing with people who are getting accepted today. But in 1975, I got accepted.
Right. So it was 1975 that you got accepted. 74 was when you started the basic. You completed basic, so it wasn't long. It wasn't long after that till you went off there.
Right. I believe I started the application. Go on. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, did you have to complete the technical side, that technical school, before you could go off, or how did that work?
No, they pulled me out as soon as I was accepted. So I believe I started the application process in January of 1975. I received my appointment in May. So I did the school as if I was going to be enlisted forever from January to May. And when I got accepted in May, they pulled me out of the school and said, we're not going to waste this seat on you since you're not going to be here. So, and that's how it happened. So from May until July of 75, which is when I began my freshman or plebe year at Annapolis, that's when I was doing the toilet cleaning. So
right, okay, that's making sense. That's making sense now. I mean, it kind of makes sense, right? That someone that's been accepted doesn't continue with that school, because it's a lot of money and training for an individual that's not probably going to utilize it. So it does make sense. It does make sense. So then you head off to that location. Can you say it one more time for me, because it's not sticking in my head?
It was Annapolis. United States Naval Academy. Yeah. Is
that over in Maryland?
It is. Yeah. It's the capital of Maryland. In fact, in one point in the United States history, it was the capital of the United States for a very brief point of time.
Yeah. Because I did visit there a few years ago, and I remember seeing that kind of like bit of history. And I remember I was like putting it onto social media, and I called it, being a Brit, I called it Maryland, and so many Americans came onto mine and was like, you're saying it wrong.
That's the proper pronunciation when it was formed. Its pronunciation evolved with time to just Maryland. But at the time, it was Maryland. And in fact, it's famous because that's where George Washington went to the state capitol in Maryland. He would have called it Maryland. And he gave up his commission as general of the Revolutionary Army, right? Of the colonial army. So and that building still exists, the Maryland state capitol. But that's where George Washington did what nobody thought he would do and say, okay, we've succeeded in our freedom against those nasty Brits. And now here we are, and I'm giving up my commission. I'm going back to being a farmer. And, everybody assumed he would continue on and use his power as general of the army to appoint himself as king. And of course, that's not the way it worked out.
No. Okay, so you head over there. I'm guessing the weather might be a bit warmer in that part of the world.
Yeah, it was a bit warmer.
Yeah.
And as you probably remember, it's on the shores of the Chesapeake, Bay, and it's just absolutely stunningly beautiful and in great contrast to Great Lakes, Illinois. And it was a wonderful place to be.
Yeah. And definitely, even at night walking around, just it's a very pretty area.
Yes.
But for you, going there as, had you turned 18 at this point or still 17?
I had, yes. I was I was 18 by then. Mm. Okay.
So going there, 18-year-old, you're going to become, or hopefully, if you pass all the training and stuff, you're going to become an officer. So what was kind of like your mindset heading to that location?
Well, the first thing that, hit me was the fact that 98% of midshipmen, as we were called, were just starting at the academy in my class, were straight out of high school. So they did not have my experience. I wouldn't, and the Navy expression is salty. If you've been in the Navy a long time, you're salty, right? And so I had only been in the Navy a little less than a year at this point. But compared to these guys, these high school kids with long hair that were coming in the class in 1975, I was salty. And I just didn't want to take anything from anybody. I knew how to wear a uniform. I knew how to do, all the drill. I knew how to drill. I knew how to do all these things that these kids, and I was the same age as most of them, but I considered them kids, did not yet know how to do. And so I guess I came in with a little bit of a chip on my shoulder that I was going to be treated just like all these other guys. And still, my class was the last all-male class to graduate from Annapolis. The class that entered the year later had the first females in it. So in my case, it was all guys. So, but I didn't have any difficulty at all with the plebe experience, which is supposed to be a very challenging experience at Annapolis. They try to stress you and get people to quit, basically. In those days, the plebe year was a filtering process. We're going to make it really suck and see who can survive. And we actually lost maybe a quarter of the class before the end of the plebe year through voluntary attrition, people just quitting. Before it was over, the 1,100, by the time we graduated, the 1,100 who started with my class, I think we finished with something around 730 graduating. So it wasn't anywhere near as filtering as the SEAL, BUDS, basic underwater demolition school filtering process, where only 10% of those who start graduate. We weren't anything like that. But still, I couldn't understand it because I had no trouble with it, but other people seemed to have a great deal of trouble dealing with the discipline and the, physical aspect and the having to follow orders. Academically, it was very rigorous. The hours were long, study hours, mandatory. And of course, physical activity every afternoon. So it kept you going, and it was very fatiguing but nothing that you could say, holy cow, that's so hard, I'm not sure I can make it through.
Okay. So all in all, how long is that? How long is that course? I guess if you could call it that.
4 years. Yeah.
It's 4
You
years.
finish.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And you finish with a bachelor's degree. And my bachelor's degree was in physics. And so, that's how it differs from many of the British schools, is that it's a full 4-year academic college curriculum with the military stuff laid on top of it.
Wow.
Or if you go to Sandhurst or something like that, people generally start with their degree and then they just get that military training at Sandhurst. And Annapolis or West Point, the academic degree is part of the curriculum.
Wow. And are they all 4 years that you know of, or is it because you're in a particular area of the Navy?
No, it's all everybody. It takes 4 years to get through the training and receive your commission.
Jeez. Okay. Well, that's something I've learned, because didn't realize it was that long. Blooming heck.
Yeah.
So was there any time? Yeah, go for it. Sorry.
Yeah, you're commissioned an ensign in the Navy. West Point, of course, it would be a second lieutenant.
Okay.
In the Army, but at Annapolis, you could go either Navy or Marine Corps. So Annapolis is the commissioning source for both the Navy and Marine Corps. And so, about a quarter to a third of the graduates go Marine Corps, and then 2/3 plus go Navy. And then if you graduate Navy, if you select Navy, then you can go air, submarines, surface, SEALs. Or if you're not physically qualified for one of those, for example, they determine that you're colorblind, you can go supply corps, logistics, or intelligence. Those were the choices when I went through. The only two that you had to volunteer for, you couldn't be drafted into. No, let me say it differently. The only one you could be drafted into of those branches was surface ships. In order to go submarines, aviation, or SEALs, you had to volunteer. You had to say, I want to go submarines or aviation or SEALs. But if you weren't selected for those, they can force you to go surface ships. So that was kind of the way it was treated. Just because you volunteered to go submarines doesn't mean you're going to get into it. You're going to get accepted, because there were further tests you would have to pass in order to get accepted into the submarine program. Same thing for SEALs.
Okay.
There wasn't really a test for aviation, but there was a limited number of slots to be a pilot. So that was the restriction there. Like I said, I wanted to be an astronaut. So my inclination when I got there was to go pilot. But before I graduated, my vision went bad, and I was no longer qualified to be a pilot. So my astronaut dreams blew up, and I decided to go submarines instead.
Okay. Now I was going to ask that question about, when did you decide? But it sounded like it was in some ways taken out of your hands. But was there anything once you got that news that kind of pushed you down the route of going submarines?
Yeah, in the 1970s, of course, the Cold War was still very active. And the most prestigious program the Navy had was the submarine program, because we were going, mano a mano against the Soviets still. And it was very active. And it was also very secretive. So you could say, hey, to a submariner, hey, what exactly do you guys do? And they wouldn't tell you. And so It was kind of intriguing and interesting from that point of view as well. You knew what the surface ships did. We would go on summer cruises between academic years, and generally on surface ships. And we knew what the aviation guys did. There wasn't much that was secret about flying jets. And the SEALs was just way too physical. You actually had to go surface ships first to become a SEAL. And I realized I didn't have the physical attributes that would have allowed me to become a SEAL. So for me, it was, from the intriguing standpoint, just interesting, kind of spooky spy standpoint, submarines seemed the way to go. So that's why I selected that.
Yeah, interesting. So it's, I mean, before we move away from Annapolis, did I get that right?
Annapolis, yeah.
Annapolis. Oh, it's spelled Annapolis.
You could say the Academy.
Say Annapolis.
Yeah, the Academy.
The Academy. Is there anything that stood out within those 4 years? A story, a moment that you can share with everybody?
Yeah, we had the most challenging thing for me was passing something called the obstacle course. And of course, you know what one of those is because you probably had it in the British Army. And, I didn't have as much upper body strength as I probably should have. When I started at Annapolis, I weighed 135 pounds. I don't know what that is in stone, sorry. But it's not very big. And I got to 155 pounds before I graduated, but my upper body strength still wasn't what it needed to be. And so I would be challenged to pass the obstacle course. And of course, you have to pass it twice a year as you get through for those 4 years. And so some of my classmates would harass me by chasing me through the obstacle course. And, some great friends, right? Some of my best friends in the world to this day. And, it was very poignant that they cared enough to go behind me and scream at me as I was going through the course. And obviously I did graduate, so I made it. But doing that twice a year for 4 years, they didn't have to do that, scream at me the entire time, but at least initially, before I improved my upper body strength. And 2 years ago, one of those guys died of cancer, one of my friends. And, because we obviously keep in touch throughout our lives and have reunions occasionally. And that was very poignant. And it was very, emotional to see that guy who kept me going through my time there weaken himself and eventually pass away due to, cancer. And so that's one of those things that I'll never forget, just one of those turning points to my life. Those guys did get me through.
Well, I don't know if you are allowed or would like to mention his name. So, he lives on
Michael Marciano from Brooklyn, New York. And he swore like a Brooklyner and every other word was the F word. And I'd never experienced anything like that. That was a bit of culture shock. He was a New York Italian, and we Ohio Italians were way different than the New York Italians. And so it was funny. It was amusing and scary at the same time. But he was a great, huge personality and a great guy, and one of my best friends ever.
Where did he go? Was he submarines as well, or did he go to?
No, he went surface ships, but he only served in the Navy for the minimum required 5 years after you graduate. He didn't make it as a career like I did. So then he went to civilian practice and, did quite well.
Cool. Well, hopefully, he'll live on in this podcast and in your episode now.
Thank you.
So there
Appreciate
you go. So moving on from there, you commission. I'm guessing it's the same terminology.
Correct.
Is that right? And that's 79. And what part of 79 are we talking?
It was late May, early June, the time frame. In fact, traditionally we called it June week, was commissioning week, but they moved it up a week for reasons I don't remember. And June week turned out to be the end of May for us. And so it's a remarkable ceremony after 4 years of torment. And of course, the whole family shows up. I remember my grandmother coming, and my Italian grandmother and my parents, and it was wonderful. It's such a celebratory, joyful, event. You throw your hats in the air, and you put your officer's insignia on your shoulders. We call shoulder boards with a single stripe of an ensign. You would call it sub-lieutenant. And and you start wondering what the rest of your life is going to be.
Mm-hmm. And so just say that rank again, because I'm terrible at Navy, not even British Navy, Royal Navy. I'm useless at it. So say the American one again.
It's ensign. ENSIGN. And same as what we call the flag, the ensign. Yeah.
Right.
And don't ask me why we call it ensign, but that's what we do.
But that's one stripe on your shoulder.
Yes, one stripe. We didn't want to use sub-lieutenant for some reason. I'm not sure why. Because we go ensign, lieutenant, junior grade, lieutenant. And then from lieutenant on, our ranks are identical to the Royal Navy ranks.
Right. Which I still don't know. So so from there you go to your first unit, first station. What do you pronounce it as?
Yeah, actually, another school. I was in school for over a year more. Yeah, I had to learn how to be a nuclear engineer after that to work on the submarine. So I spent a year in nuclear training for the reactor. And then I went 3 months to submarine school, which is in Faslane, Scotland, for the Royal Navy, because I've been to the Royal Navy's submarine school as well.
Nice.
And then I reported my first ship in December of 1980.
Right. Okay.
And it was in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, because submarine school for us was in Groton, Connecticut, which is also very cold and very snowy. And so when they asked you, where do you want to go, you got to choose 3 locations for your first duty assignment. And for my 3 locations, I put Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, and Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. And I got Pearl Harbor,
They didn't
Hawaii.
reject it.
So, yeah.
So Pearl Harbor, hey, you put that down 3 times and they gave it to you. So was you pretty excited to get sent out there?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I'd passed through Hawaii before, but I'd never lived there. And it was every bit as spectacular as I was hoping it would be. First of all, it's the best submarine home port in the world. The water gets really deep after you leave the harbor, so you can submerge almost immediately after you get outside the mouth of the harbor, which means you're not rolling around on the surface, which is not fun for a submarine. In the East Coast submarine bases, you generally have to transit for 8 to 10 hours after you leave port before you can before the water's deep enough to submerge. And Pearl's great, not just from a climate standpoint, but from an operational standpoint. And of course, I was very interested in the Pacific for historic reasons. I was always fascinated by the Pacific War. And many of the places that I'd read about and studied that World War II in the Pacific still existed in Pearl Harbor. So it was fascinating from that standpoint as well.
Amazing. So what's it like living out there? And I've shared this with you, and by the time this episode goes live, hopefully it's all gone to plan. But I'm heading out in March for the first time to see Hawaii with my own eyes, which I'm very, very much excited about. But what's it like being stationed there?
Even when I got off the plane for the first time, the air smelled different. The rattling of the trees that you could hear was very unique, not something that you experience on the mainland of the United States. Everything was, of course, the climate, the sun, everything felt different. And I ended up spending all of my operational tours, except for my executive officer tour out of Pearl Harbor. So for all my submarine tours, except for one, were out of Pearl Harbor. And I deployed 7 times over the course of my Navy career. But every time I returned from deployment, I returned to Pearl Harbor. And so when I would return from those deployments, it would be like, I'm home. And so I joked that it's like a baby duck imprinting on its mother. I imprinted on Hawaii as my home from returning from all those deployments into Hawaii. And so now when I go back to Hawaii, I feel like, I'm home. And so even though I live in Florida right now, it doesn't feel like home. Hawaii still feels like home for me. And I don't know if there's an equivalent for Royal Navy sailors, but that's the way it was for me.
Okay. Well, I mean, what can you share about the island? Because I think I don't know if it's different for Brits against Americans,
Hmm.
but the people that I've spoken to, when you think about Hawaii, you think of quite small islands, apart from like the big one that everyone mentions. But when
Yeah.
you get there, is it bigger and does it feel like part of America and all of that kind of stuff?
Yes and no. Right. Of course, when I get to Hawaii as a Caucasian, I'm a minority. So
Mm.
that's unusual, right? That's a first. Um, Oahu, the island where Pearl Harbor is located, and Honolulu, it's the most populated, over 1 million people on that island. So yeah, you experience traffic jams on Oahu, but
Oh,
it takes about, without the traffic jams, it would take you about 3 hours to drive around Oahu. So that, don't know if that
yeah.
seems large or small to you. The big island that you referred to is bigger than, I think it's bigger than the state of Rhode Island. It's massive. So it's 6 hours to drive from one end to the other. Um, so yeah, but Oahu, the place I feel the most at home, the Hawaii culture is. In fact, I'm wearing a Hawaiian shirt today. We would call it an aloha shirt in Hawaii. The Hawaii culture is much more laid back than anywhere on mainland United States. It's got a soft vibe. It's got its own form of music, Hawaiian music. It's got its own cadence of speaking English. It's got
Okay.
a kind of a bastardized form of English called Pidgin that a lot of locals will still speak. It's not as strong a Pidgin as maybe somewhere in the Southwest Pacific would be, or Southeast Asia Pidgin, but it's still, you learn to, in fact, my kids, when they were growing up, would fall into Pidgin anytime they were with their friends, right?
Okay.
Rather than proper American. I won't call it proper English to you Brits, but anyway. Um, so it's kind of interesting, and a whole bunch of, it's like its own country, which it was until the United States annexed it and deposed Queen Liliuokalani in 1895, I believe. So that probably should not have been done. It probably should have stayed a sovereign state, but that's an element of history that we can't change. There's
Yeah.
still a sovereignty movement among the native Hawaiians who want to take sovereignty back from the United States. I don't know how that would succeed. I don't think they have the resources to actually become an independent country again. So I give it very low probability of success. But it's a very fascinating place on a bunch of different levels.
Mm.
It's a kind of this amalgamation of immigrant Japanese, immigrant Chinese, immigrant Koreans, immigrant Filipinos, all of whom immigrated to work farms in Hawaii in the last century, the 1800s. And then, of course, Caucasians from the United States who came for military or other reasons for work. And so now all of those people are called locals, or kama'aina, to use the Hawaiian word. And there's still a lot of Hawaiian language spoken in Hawaii. So it's just fascinating on a bunch of different levels.
Mm. It sounds it. It sounds it, and I'm looking forward to learning more in person when I get out there. But going back to your
Yeah.
time living out there, you mentioned about being deployed 7 times from that
Mhm.
location. So you've got your submarines, and is it a case of looking after them before you then deploy on that sub? And how long are you away each time you do deploy?
Uh, yeah, so you're maintaining the submarine when you aren't at sea. And of course, sometimes you do maintenance when you are at sea. The most I was at sea in 1 year was 10 months out of a 12. But you generally deploy 6 months out of the year. But just because you're not deployed doesn't mean you're not going to sea every week, doing exercises and training and things like that. So you're at sea a lot. Yeah, I missed many Christmases, many birthdays, my kids and my own. And so, yeah, it's a challenging lifestyle. I don't want to make it sound all happy and glad. There were periods of time with very, you know, challenging. Not like going to Afghanistan for a year. Not that kind of challenging, which, I give credit to anybody who did that. But, it's also much more isolated. Not seeing the sun for many months at a time it takes some getting used to. People who volunteer for submarine duty generally are not claustrophobic, but the isolation gets to you. Back in the day, the only form of entertainment we had was movies and harassing each other. So you had to develop thick skin because that became a form of entertainment. Is let's see if we can get to that guy by harassing him.
Yeah.
You become very hardened, insensitive, maybe even. The funny thing is, after you've been underwater for a long period of time, there's certain smells that you get used to inside the submarine. And when you surface and go topside for the first time, fresh air smells funny. It's
okay.
You're not used to it, right? You become used to the unique smells of the submarine and people and all of those bad smells. And when those bad smells no longer exist, this is what fresh air smells like again. It's kind of bizarre, right?
So I've seen some YouTube videos where they tried to like break down submarines. And so is it like that? So it's sectioned off. So you got like the accommodation where you'd sleep. Then you've got like a gym section, and you've got like a place for food. Is that how it's kind of laid out? If you're allowed to share, of course.
Yeah, no, of course. Yeah. The answer is yes, except our submarines my fast attack submarines were too small to have a gym section. So we didn't have anything like that. So it would be the counterpart to the Trafalgar class or the Astute class in the Royal Navy. So I was on Los Angeles class submarines. Yeah, and we didn't have room for gym. So you did what you could do given the space limitations. I haven't seen many. Honestly, I'm not attracted to the YouTube videos, so I haven't seen many of them because I lived it. But I suspect they're correct.
And again, I said this earlier that some silly question is going to come your way. You mentioned about people that typically go for submarines? They're not really claustrophobic. But did people get like travel sick or that kind of stuff?
I don't remember any episodes. I remember, one or two cases of people that just couldn't deal with the stress, and we had to transfer them off and disqualify them from submarine duty. But I'm talking about after, months at sea. Not, somebody. The only time where we shut the hatch and somebody went crazy was a visitor, a rider, we call them. The snarky American expression for riders on submarines are air breathers, because they don't do any actual work. All they do is breathe the air that you work so hard to make. So we call them air breathers. That means they're useless riders. So we had one air breather, useless rider, who wanted to ride on the submarine, but the moment the hatch shut, she started freaking out. We had to actually tranquilize her, drug her to keep her from doing something destructive, and until we could turn around and go back in and drop her off.
Wow. And so what was your role? Let's talk about, maybe unless this was the same role throughout, but what was your role with your rank on the subs?
Mm-hmm. Well, the American Navy is different than the Royal Navy in that everybody starts out as a nuclear engineer. And so your first tour on submarines is going to have something to do with the reactor plant. In the Royal Navy, you have engineering officers, weapons engineering officers, and then deck officers, you call them. And so the engineering officers operate the reactor plant, and that's all they do. The weapons systems officers, the weapon system, torpedoes, sonar, things like that. And that's pretty much all they do. And the deck officers stand watch officer, and they can elevate to captain of the submarine, but the engineering officers and the weapons officers can't. in the American Navy, we decided we need depth. We need to be able to replace people. We can't have just 3 of any one, type of officer on the submarine. We need more than 3 or 4. So everybody can do anything. So we first train on the reactor plant, go to school, operate a shore-based reactor, get qualified on that. Then we report to our first submarine. So your first 3 or 4 years on the submarine may be as electrical officer, reactor controls officer, machinery officer, damage control officer, something like that, has to do with engineering. During that time, you do qualify as watch officer. So you stand watch on the reactor plant, and then after you qualify that, you get to stand watch as officer of the deck, what you would call watch officer. And so once you qualify as officer of the deck, then you have to learn how to become a warrior on the submarine, shoot torpedoes, do all those kinds of things. And eventually you earn what we call dolphins, which is the warfare insignia, the gold dolphins that we pin on our uniform. And so that's after 2 or 3 years on board the submarine when you can earn your dolphins. Once you've done that, then you generally, after 3 or 4 years on the ship, transfer to shore and do some shore duty just to clear your mind. So,
okay.
And get some shore time, right? Then after 2 years or so of shore duty, if you screen for what we call department head, you go back to a submarine as either the chief engineer, the weapons officer, or the navigator operations officer, one of those 3 department heads. And in my case, I started as a chief engineer and then went to another ship as navigator operations officer. So I did 2 department head tours. And so that'll take you to about your 10-year service time. And then you go to shore again. In my case, I went to the Joint Chiefs of Staff and worked for General Colin Powell, who was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at that time. And then after 2 or 3 years ashore, generally 2, if you screen for executive officer or second in command, you'll go back to sea as executive officer. In my case, I went to a Trident missile submarine as executive officer, USS Florida. And then after that, you go ashore again. And if you screen for command, you get selected as captain of a submarine. And I went to USS Indianapolis as commanding officer. So that took me through my 18th year of commissioned service. And
right.
Then you go to shore again. Then I screened for major command, and I was sent to serve as commodore of a squadron of 6 submarines. And that took me to my 24th year of commissioned service. And then I went one last shore tour where I headed all anti-submarine warfare for the East Coast of the United States. And then I retired from that job.